On my 67th birthday, my daughter-in-law knocked my cake off the table and smiled. Oops. So I picked up her $3,000 Chanel bag and dropped it straight into the fire pit and gave her the same word right back. That night, I learned something I should have known years earlier. Family love should never cost you your dignity. The cake didn't happen out of nowhere. By the time everyone froze around that smashed mess of frosting on the patio stones, I already understood exactly what Brielle had done. Oops. My son nearly came undone. I simply told him his wife had started it. My name is Alina Whitfield. I'm 67, a widow, and this is the story of how I stopped being a guest in my own home that Saturday afternoon. I had hosted a small backyard gathering for my birthday. Just family, a couple of neighbors, and a coconut cake my friend Carol had baked from scratch. Brielle showed up almost an hour late, swinging her new Chanel bag so everyone at the party would notice it. She spent most of the afternoon scrolling her phone, clearly annoyed that the day wasn't centered on her. When it came time to sing happy birthday, Brielle suddenly announced she needed the bathroom. There was more than enough room to walk around the dessert table, but she cut directly past it instead. I watched her elbow swing out on purpose. The cake slid off the table and hit the stones, frosting everywhere. She didn't even glance down. She just tossed out a flat, careless oops and kept walking toward the house. The yard went dead silent. Nobody moved. I didn't cry and I didn't raise my voice. I walked over to the patio chair where Brielle had left her prized bag, picked it up, and dropped it into the glowing coals of the fire pit. Within seconds, the leather started to smoke, filling the air with a sharp, ugly smell. My son Dean came running toward me, his face bright red, shouting that I'd lost my mind and that I was going to pay for it. I looked at him as steady as if I were watering the porch ferns. "Send me the bill, Dean," I said. "But first, ask your wife why she felt the need to ruin my birthday." If Brielle wanted to call the police over a handbag, I was more than ready to report the deliberate destruction of my cake and the months of disrespect I'd been swallowing in my own house. Brielle stepped out of the bathroom just in time to see the leather curl black and collapse into the flames. Her scream carried halfway down the block. But that, as everyone was about to learn, was only the opening act. Dean and Brielle had moved in with me about 14 months earlier, telling me it was temporary, just until they saved enough for a down payment. In the beginning, they mostly kept to their room, polite at dinner, careful with their things, the kind of houseguests anyone would welcome. But slowly, week by week, Brielle began claiming the house as her own, my closets, my kitchen, my schedule, until I felt like a visitor inside the home my husband had left me. She rearranged my spice cabinet without asking. She replaced the framed photos on the hallway wall with prints she liked better, sliding mine into a drawer. Small things, each one easy to excuse on its own, until I looked up one day and realized I didn't recognize my own house anymore. The morning after the fire pit incident, the air in that house was thick enough to choke on. Dean stormed into the kitchen demanding an apology and a check for $3,000. I poured myself black coffee, sat down at the counter, and took a slow sip before I answered. "There will be no check, and there will be no apology," I said, my voice flat and even. "Her emotional damage is not my responsibility." He scoffed, whining that Brielle was upstairs sobbing and that I was being cruel, that I'd embarrassed her in front of the neighbors. Rather than get pulled into a circular fight with a 36-year-old man behaving like a child, I rinsed my mug, set it in the rack, and went upstairs. I walked into my own master bathroom, the one Brielle had filled wall to wall with her imported serums, perfumes, and curling tools, shoving my own toothbrush and lotion into a sliver of counter space. I found a sturdy cardboard box, and item by item, packed up every bottle and brush that belonged to her. I carried it into the hallway and set it down outside their bedroom door. Then I called a locksmith I'd used for years. By that evening, my bedroom and bathroom both had brand new deadbolts. When Brielle tried to walk in that night to use my soaking tub, she found a locked door and her belongings waiting for her in the hall. I could hear her hissing about it to Dean through the wall. I simply turned up my radio and went on with my evening. Tuesday morning, Brielle came down expecting breakfast like always. For more than a year, I had been cooking and buying groceries for all three of us out of my retirement income. She perched on a stool and asked how long the eggs would take, since Dean had a big presentation that morning. "I have no idea, Brielle," I said, sitting down with my toast. I suppose that depends on when you start cooking them. She opened the refrigerator and found it nearly bare. I had quietly moved my own groceries into a small fridge in my bedroom days earlier. "Where's all the food?" she demanded, her voice climbing. "Dean is starving." "Dean knows where the grocery store is," I said evenly, brushing a crumb from my plate. "I'm a widow, Brielle, not a housekeeper. Starting today, the two of you are feeding yourselves." She opened her mouth to argue, but something in my expression stopped her cold. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply finished explaining myself. That afternoon, my daughter Vanessa called from 3 states away. She has spent her whole life siding with whoever made things easiest for her, and Dean had clearly already got to her. "Mom, you're being completely unreasonable," she said in that familiar condescending tone. "Just write the check for the bag and make them a proper dinner. You know how stressed Dean gets." By the way, her husband needed a short-term loan to keep his business afloat, and since I obviously had money to spare. "There are no loans, Vanessa," I said, cutting her off. "The bank of Mom is permanently closed." I hung up before she could start in on the guilt. It was time to shut off every faucet still running. Years earlier, right after my husband passed, I had opened a small joint checking account with Dean for emergencies only, a safety net in case something happened to me, funded entirely by my own retirement income. Lately, I'd noticed the balance quietly draining. That afternoon, I drove to the bank and asked for 6 months of statements. Sitting with the personal banker, I read through the charges: steakhouse dinners, designer boutiques, day spas, all dressed up as Dean's medical emergencies, but carrying Brielle's signature all over them. By the time I finished, nearly $21,000 had disappeared in half a year. Once the banker confirmed every deposit had come from my retirement account, I withdrew what remained, moved it into my private account, and closed the joint account for good. It took less than 20 minutes to take my finances back. At 2 o'clock the next afternoon, my phone rang. It was Dean, whispering frantically, somewhere between furious and humiliated. "Mom, I'm at lunch with Brielle and her clients, and my card just got declined. The bank said the account's closed. You're embarrassing me." "The bank isn't lying to you, Dean," I said, calmly clipping dead branches off my rose bushes. "That money was set aside for my medical bills, not your wife's lifestyle. You'll need to cover it yourself." "My cards are maxed out," he hissed. "Then I suggest you ask the manager for an apron and start on the dishes," I said, and ended the call. I shut my phone off, poured a glass of iced tea, and sat out on the patio enjoying the afternoon. For once, Dean had to solve a problem entirely on his own. Brielle hated losing control of anything. To her, every boundary I set wasn't a rule, it was a personal insult. That Friday night, without a word to me, she threw together a dinner party with 3 girlfriends and their husbands, as though the house belonged to her. I came downstairs around 8 in my robe and slippers to find her hosting in my living room, using my good china and pouring my late husband's saved bottle of Cabernet. I walked over, switched off the music, and gathered the wine and the unused glasses off the coffee table. "Good evening," I said with a pleasant, ice-cold smile. "Eleanor, we're in the middle of something," Brielle snapped, her neck flushing as she tried to keep face in front of her friends. "I'm so glad everyone's enjoying themselves," I said, tucking the bottle under my arm, "but this is my wine, this is my house, and it's time for my evening reading. You're welcome to finish your visit out on the patio or upstairs." I switched on my reading lamp, sat down, and opened my book. Her friends traded uncomfortable glances, mumbled some excuses, and within minutes had gathered their coats and left. Brielle stood in the middle of the living room shaking with fury, but she couldn't find a single word to throw at me. She turned and stomped upstairs while I quietly turned the page, savoring the silence. The second car in the driveway was mine too, title, insurance, registration, every bit of it, though Dean had been treating it as his own for months, using it to commute and drive Brielle around town, saving himself a fortune on gas and upkeep. It sat in the driveway every night while they slept. I took the spare key, drove it 3 blocks over to Carol's garage, and walked home with the keys in my pocket. At 7:30 Monday morning, I heard Dean thundering down the stairs, the front door slamming, then his footsteps pounding back into the kitchen where I was steeping tea. "Mom, where's the car? It's not in the driveway and Brielle's going to be late," he panicked. "I put it in storage, Dean," I said, blowing on my cup. It's no longer available for your daily commute. How are we supposed to get to work? He demanded. The bus stops 3 blocks away, I said evenly. Rideshares exist too. I'm no longer covering gas and insurance for your free rides. You're a grown man with a paycheck, figure it out. He went silent, then bolted upstairs, and a moment later I heard Brielle shrieking. They both left the house in a dead sprint that morning, dragging their feet and looking thoroughly miserable. For the first time in years, they had to find their own way. My daughter Vanessa never could stand being left out of family drama, and with her husband away on business, she showed up on my porch unannounced that Wednesday, suitcase in hand, fully expecting me to host her, feed her, and tell her she was right about everything. We sat in the backyard near the fire pit, cold and clean now. "Mom, you need to stop this," she said, arms crossed like a disappointed schoolteacher. "Dean called me in tears, says you're starving them, you stole the car, you humiliated Brielle in front of her friends. You're tearing this family apart over a piece of cake." "I'm not tearing anything apart, Vanessa," I said, completely unbothered. "I'm reclaiming my own home. You and your brother seem to think it's my job to fund your lives indefinitely. Not anymore." She let out a long, theatrical sigh. "Things are tight right now," she admitted. "We're going through it too. I need you to advance part of my inheritance, just $50,000, so I can help bail out his business, maybe send Dean a little to help him move out." I stared at her. There it was, the real reason for the surprise visit, greed dressed up as concern. "There is no early inheritance, Vanessa," I said, standing. "The money your father and I saved is for my retirement, not your husband's failing business or your brother's wife's handbags. If you're here as my daughter, the guest room is yours for the night. If you're here as a debt collector, I suggest you look up nearby hotels." She stayed the night anyway, whispering with Dean as though the two of them could still talk me into backing down. They were wrong. The guest room had always been the second largest room in the house, but over the past year, Brielle had slowly turned it into her own private walk-in closet, rolling racks, towers of shoeboxes, full-length mirrors crowding every inch. She turned my home into her personal boutique. That weekend, while all 3 of them were out, I emptied the room myself. Every dress, every shoebox, every mirror went straight into Dean and Brielle's bedroom. I cleared the space, brought in my easel and my paints, and locked the door to what was now my new studio. When they got home, I heard Brielle's scream rattle the floorboards as she opened her bedroom door to find a mountain of garbage bags. Dean came flying down the stairs, practically foaming. "You can't do this. You bagged up all her clothes like trash," he yelled. I was calmly misting my orchids in the living room. "That is the guest room, Dean," I said without raising my voice, "not Brielle's closet. Her things belong in her bedroom. My house is mine again. If it feels a little crowded up there now, you both know exactly where the front door is." Living under my rules finally cracked their marriage wide open. Without my money, my car, and the extra space in my house, whatever had been holding the two of them together started showing its true shape. The polite smiles disappeared completely. From my studio, I could hear the arguments getting louder by the day. On a Tuesday night, the whole thing finally blew apart. "I'm leaving this hellhole," Brielle screamed, and I heard the unmistakable rattle of suitcase wheels dragging down the hallway. She stormed into the kitchen where I stood making a cup of chamomile, glaring at me with pure resentment, clearly waiting for me to apologize or beg her to stay for Dean's sake. I just stirred my tea slowly and met her eyes with total, calm indifference. She clenched her jaw, yanked the front door open, and marched out to the rideshare waiting in the driveway. She never looked back. Once the free house, free car, free meals, and free money vanished, so did whatever she'd called love for my son. Vanessa packed up and left the very next morning, realizing there was nothing left to grift and nobody left on her side. Dean was left completely alone, surrounded by cardboard boxes in a wrecked bedroom, facing the consequences of his own choices for what felt like the first time in his adult life. I didn't feel a drop of pity. I felt calm, for the first time in longer than I could remember. There was just one piece of business left. 2 weeks passed. Dean tried quietly working his way back into my good graces, playing the wounded son, doing the dishes without being asked, speaking to me in a soft, sorry voice, bringing up old childhood memories out of nowhere. He was waiting for me to fold, to tell him he could stay forever and that I'd take care of everything. One afternoon, he found me sitting by the fire pit enjoying the evening air. "Mom, I know I messed up," he said, sitting beside me, eyes on his shoes. Brielle blinded me. I was an idiot. I'm so sorry. I accept your apology, Dean, I said, keeping my eyes on the tree line. He exhaled like a weight had lifted, clearly assuming we were back to how things used to be. Thanks, Mom. Things are going to be so much better around here now, I raised a hand to stop him. No, Dean. I'm glad you see where you went wrong, but that doesn't change anything. You have 2 months to save what you can, find a place, and move out. He stared at me, blindsided. You're kicking me out, but Brielle's already gone. The problem was never only Brielle, I said gently, but without an ounce of give. The problem was that you saw me as your permanent safety net. You're 36 years old. It's time you built a life that's actually yours. I love you, son, but I'm done raising you. There was no shouting, no argument. Dean looked at me and understood the decision was final. 2 months later, he loaded the last of his boxes into a rental truck and handed me his set of keys. That night, I lit the fire pit again, cut myself a thick slice of leftover birthday cake, and sank into my favorite patio chair to watch the flames. The house behind me was quiet, a deep, clean, total silence. I took a sip of my tea, smiled into the dark, and breathed out slowly. My home was finally mine again. Sometimes family love gets confused with silent suffering. But disrespect inside your own home was never peace. It was self-abandonment dressed up as patience. I learned that boundaries don't destroy a family. They reveal exactly who was ever there for the right reasons in the first place.